My name is Sarah, and I've always been the budget daughter. My father, Robert, is a man who measures success in thread counts and the length of a yacht. My sister, Lauren, she's his masterpiece. When she got married 3 years ago, he spent $250,000 on a weekend in Tuscany. When it was my turn, I didn't ask for a dime. My fiancé, Mark, and I are both social workers. We don't have a Tuscany budget, but we have a beautiful public park and a locally catered dinner budget. We were proud of it. That was until the family brunch 2 weeks before the wedding. "So, Sarah," my father said, swirling a glass of mimosa that probably cost more than my bridal shoes. "I heard a rumor. Is it true you're serving the meal on compostable bamboo?" "It's an eco-friendly outdoor wedding, Dad," I said, keeping my voice level. "It fits the vibe." "The vibe being poverty," Lauren chimed in, adjusting the 5-carat diamond Dad had helped her husband subsidize. "I mean, Dad, I'm embarrassed to invite my friends. It looks like a high school graduation party." My father let out a dry, condescending chuckle. "Look, Sarah, I've decided to help. I can't have the Vance name associated with a cheap backyard affair. I'm going to book the Grand Regency Ballroom for you, but since you're so fond of independence, I'll expect you to pay me back the deposit over the next 5 years. Consider it a lesson in standards." "No thanks, Dad," I said, putting my napkin down. "We've already paid for the park. It's done." "It's not done," he snapped, his face hardening. "I've already sold your vision to your mother. She's distraught. Either you move it to a real venue or don't expect us to be there to watch you embarrass yourself." I looked at Mark. He squeezed my hand under the table. We walked out. But here's the thing my father forgot. He's a big picture man, which means he never looks at the fine print. He spent the last year bragging about his latest real estate, Flip, an old, historic estate on the edge of town called the Gables. He told everyone he'd sold it to a luxury hotel group for a massive profit. What he didn't know was that the luxury hotel group was actually a shell corporation owned by my late grandfather's estate. And Grandpa had left me the controlling interest in that estate, with the strict instruction not to tell my father until I was 30. I turned 30 yesterday. Before I tell you what happened when I showed up at my cheap wedding and handed my father a bill that made his Tuscany trip look like a trip to a fast food drive-thru, I want to know, have you ever had a parent try to buy your big day just to save their own reputation? Tell me in the comments. And hit subscribe because in part 2, the cheap park wedding gets canceled, but not for the reason my father thinks. The morning after the brunch, I got a call that made my blood run cold. It was the city parks department. "Miss Vance, I'm calling to confirm the cancellation of your wedding permit for Oakwood Grove next Saturday," the clerk said. "Cancellation? I didn't cancel anything," I stammered, gripping the phone. "Oh, a Mr. Robert Vance called this morning. He identified himself as the primary financier and provided the transaction ID for the deposit. He claimed the wedding was being upgraded to a private venue and requested the refund be mailed to his office." My father hadn't just mocked my wedding, he had sabotaged it. He was trying to corner me, leaving me with no venue and no choice but to crawl to him and beg for the Grand Regency Ballroom. Mark found me sitting on the kitchen floor, staring at the wall. When I told him, I expected him to be furious. Instead, he got that look in his eye, the one he gets when a case file doesn't add up. "Sarah," he said, kneeling beside me, "your grandfather's trust. You said the transition of power happened on your 30th birthday, right?" "Yesterday," I whispered. "And your father thinks he sold the Gables estate to a hotel group, but it was actually your trust that bought it." I nodded. "He thinks he's getting a $20 million payout next week when the hotel group finalizes the deed. He's already leveraged that money to pay for Lauren's second house." Mark smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Well, if you're the owner of the Gables and your father just destroyed your park wedding, I think it's time we move the ceremony to a much more expensive location." I realized then what I had to do. I called my father. "Dad, you were right," I said, pitching my voice to sound defeated. "The park fell through. We have nowhere to go." I told you, Sarah, he purred, sounding smugger than ever. The Grand Regency is waiting. I'll send the contract over. Just sign the repayment agreement and we'll forget this bamboo plate nonsense ever happened. Actually, Dad, I have a better idea. Since you're so proud of the Gables, why don't we host it there? It's a construction site, but the gardens are perfect. It would be great publicity for your hotel deal, right? There was a pause. I knew exactly what he was thinking. If he hosted a high society wedding at his sold property, it would look like a victory lap to his investors. Fine, he said, but you pay for the catering. And Sarah, wear something that didn't come from a vintage bin. I have a reputation to uphold. I hung up and called my lawyer. It's time to send the final closing documents for the Gables to my father's office. But don't send them under the trust's name. Send them under the shell company. And make sure the buyer's representative listed is me. The day of the wedding arrived, and the Gables estate looked breathtaking. My father had spent the last week supervising the grounds, essentially using my wedding as a free staging opportunity to show off the property to his wealthy friends. He had invited half the city's elite, turning my intimate ceremony into a corporate gala. When Mark and I pulled up, the driveway was lined with Maseratis and Range Rovers. Lauren was already there, draped in silk, scoffing at the minimalist, floral arrangements I'd brought in. "Oh, Sarah," she sighed, checking her reflection in a gold-rimmed mirror. "At least the house is expensive, even if the bride is thrifty." I just smiled. I was wearing a simple, elegant silk gown, the one my grandmother had worn. It hadn't cost a dime, but I looked like royalty. My father walked up to me, puffing out his chest. He was wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than Mark's car. "Beautiful, isn't it? The investors are all here. They're calling it the deal of the decade. Once the papers are signed tonight, the Vance name becomes legendary." "It's a beautiful house, Dad," I said, looking at the stone facade. "It would be a shame if something happened to the sale." "Nothing is going to happen. The hotel group is represented by a very strict legal firm. They're supposed to meet me in the library at 6:00 p.m. for the final handover." The ceremony was quick and beautiful. We exchanged vows in the sunken garden. My father barely listened. He was too busy networking with a CEO from a rival firm. As soon as we said, "I do," the clock struck 6. "Time for business," my father whispered, patting me on the shoulder as if I were a business associate rather than his daughter. "Go eat your budget cake, Sarah. I have a $20 million check to collect." He marched into the library of the estate, followed by his lawyers and Lauren, who wanted to be there for the big moment. I waited 5 minutes, then followed them. When I walked in, my father was sitting at the massive oak desk, pen in hand. Opposite him sat my lawyer, Mr. Henderson, who was holding a thick manila folder. "Ah, Sarah, just in time to see the Vance fortune double," my father crowed. "Now, Henderson, let's get this over with. Where's the check from the hotel group?" Mr. Henderson didn't reach for a check. Instead, he pulled out a detailed invoice. "Actually, Mr. Vance," Henderson said, his voice as dry as parchment. "Before we discuss the closing, we need to address the unauthorized event fee. According to the purchase agreement you signed 6 months ago, any private use of the property by the seller after the intent to buy was filed incurs a penalty. Plus, there's the matter of the catering and staging costs you billed to the buyer's account this week." My father's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about? I'm the seller. I can use the lawn for my daughter's wedding." "Not according to the fine print, Robert," I said, stepping forward. Lauren turned, her mouth hanging open. "Sarah, what are you doing in here? This is grown-up talk." "I am the buyer's representative, Lauren," I said, pulling a second chair up to the desk. "And Dad, you've spent $150,000 of the hotel group's money on your own guests, your own liquor, and your own PR stunt today. That's a breach of contract." My father started to laugh, but it sounded forced. "You, the buyer, don't be ridiculous. This is a multinational corporation." "A corporation owned by the Vance Family Trust," I said, sliding the transition documents across the desk. "The one Grandpa left to me. You sold the house to me, Dad, and today you broke the rules of the sale." Color drained from my father's face so fast I thought he might actually collapse. He grabbed the documents, his hands shaking as he scanned the signatures. "Grandpa's trust," he whispered, his eyes darting to Mr. Henderson. "But he said I was the executor." "You were the interim executor, Robert," Mr. Henderson corrected, adjusting his glasses. "Until Sarah reached the age of maturity specified in the secret codicil, which was 30. As of 48 hours ago, you have zero authority over these funds." Lauren stepped forward, her voice shrill. "Wait, so the $20 million, the payout for the house, that's still coming to Dad, right? My contractor for the new house needs his payment by Monday." I looked at my sister, then back at my father. "That's the thing about the intent to buy agreement you signed, Dad. Page 42, Section 8, the Ethics and Usage Clause." I pointed to the paragraph highlighted in yellow. "It states that if the seller uses the property for personal gain or private events during the escrow period without written consent from the trustee, the purchase price is subject to a 50% liquidated damages penalty." My father's jaw dropped. 50%, that's $10 million. $10 million that stays in the trust, I said calmly. "To be used for the budget causes you mocked at brunch. Mark and I have already earmarked it for a new community center downtown." "You're stealing from your own father," Robert roared, slamming his fist on the desk. "I groomed you. I gave you the Vance name." "You tried to cancel my wedding permit, Dad," I reminded him, my voice turning cold. "You tried to humiliate me into a debt trap at the Grand Regency just so you could look good in front of your friends. You didn't give me the Vance name. You tried to use it to choke me." "Robert," his own lawyer whispered, leaning in. "She's right. You signed the document. And since you already spent the anticipated profit on Lauren's mansion and your own margin calls on the stock market, if this payout is cut in half, you're technically insolvent." The silence in the library was heavy. Outside, we could hear the music from the reception, the cheap local band I had hired, playing a joyous tune. "I'm not finished," I said, leaning back in the chair. "Since the house is now officially mine, and the event you hosted today was unauthorized, I'm handing you the bill for the venue rental, at the executive rate you love so much." I slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. $85,000, Lauren read out loud, her voice trembling. "For one afternoon." "Standards are expensive, Dad," I said, echoing his own words. "Isn't that what you told me?" My father's face went from a pale white to a dangerous, mottled purple. He didn't look like a tycoon anymore. He looked like a cornered animal. He stood up, smoothing his expensive tuxedo jacket with trembling hands, and looked at the library doors. "You think a piece of paper makes you the boss, Sarah?" he sneered. "Outside those doors are the most powerful people in this city. They don't know Trustee Sarah. They know my daughter, the social worker who couldn't afford her own flowers. If I go out there and tell them you're having a mental break, that you're trying to sabotage a multi-million-dollar development, who do you think they'll believe?" "Dad, don't," I warned. "Oh, I will," he hissed. "I'll have you committed for an evaluation before the sun goes down. Henderson, tell her. A trustee can be removed if they are deemed mentally unfit to manage the assets." Lauren's eyes lit up. "He's right, Sarah. You've been acting so manic. All this talk about shell companies. It's delusional. We just want to help you." I looked at Mark. He hadn't said a word the entire time, but now he reached into the pocket of his suit and pulled out his phone. He tapped a button, and a high-quality audio recording filled the room. "Yes, this is Robert Vance. I'm the primary financier for the Oakwood Grove permit. That's right, cancel it. My daughter is a bit unstable and doesn't know what's good for her. We're moving it to a real venue. Refund the deposit to my business account. I'll handle the fallout with her." The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was even heavier than before. "That's illegal," my father whispered, though his voice had lost its edge. "You recorded a private call." "The Parks Department records all official transactions for quality assurance, Robert," Mark said, his voice calm and professional. "As Sarah's husband and a social worker, I have many contacts in city administration." They were more than happy to provide a copy of the call when I reported a case of financial elder abuse and identity fraud regarding the deposit. Fraud, Lurin gasped. He signed for a refund on a permit I paid for using my own savings, I said. That's a crime, Dad. And if you go out there and tell your powerful friends that I'm the unstable one, I'll play that recording over the garden PA system. I wonder how your investors will feel knowing you steal from your own children to cover your debts. My father sank back into the leather chair. The king of the construction site looked suddenly very small. What do you want? He muttered. I want you to sign the closing papers for the $10 million valuation, I said. And then I want you to walk out there, find my mother, and tell her that you're retiring. Because as of tomorrow, I'm auditing every single Vance family account. My father didn't sign. Instead, he let out a short, hysterical laugh. You think I'm that easy to beat? The closing papers are just formalities. The physical deed to the Gables, the original 19th century parchment, is in the floor safe in this very room. Without it, you can't register the transfer in time to stop my Monday morning withdrawals. He scrambled toward the corner of the library, shoving a heavy rug aside to reveal a digital keypad flush with the floor. I changed the code this morning, Sarah, he panted, his fingers dancing over the buttons. Once I have that deed, I'm leaving. I'll burn the sale before I let you have it. Beep, 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 chirp. The safe clicked open. My father reached in, his face lit with a triumphant sneer, but as his hand touched the bottom, his expression froze. Empty, he whispered. How? I put it here at 8:00 a.m. You did, I said, leaning against the mahogany desk. But you forgot that I hired the budget catering staff. Do you know who they are, Dad? They're the same crew who worked for Grandpa for 30 years, the ones you fired to cut costs the day after his funeral. The waiter who had been standing by the door, a man named Elias, stepped forward. He wasn't holding a tray of appetizers anymore. He was holding a heavy, wax-sealed envelope. Grandpa Arthur told us that if you ever tried to hide the house from Sarah, we were to ensure the special ingredient reached the right hands, Elias said, handing the envelope to me. You had the staff rob me, Lauren shrieked. I had the staff protect my property, I corrected. And speaking of ingredients, Dad, you mocked my cheap wedding cake. You said it looked like a lopsided mess. I walked over to the small dessert table in the corner where the cake sat, untouched. I reached into the frosting near the base and pulled out a small, airtight plastic cylinder. Inside was a key, not a modern house key, but an old, ornate skeleton key. Grandpa didn't just leave me the trust, I said, holding the key up. He left me the one thing you've been looking for since he died, the key to the vault in the boathouse, the one where he kept the real ledgers, the ones that show you didn't just leverage the family money, Dad. You stole it from the charity funds he set up for my mother's medical research. My father's knees hit the floor. The deed was in my hand, and the key to his prison was in the other. The guests are waiting for the big announcement, Robert, Mark said, checking his watch. Are you going to tell them you're retiring, or should I go get the sheriff who's currently enjoying a budget slider in the garden? My father didn't head for the garden to make an announcement. He looked at Lauren, a silent, panicked signal passing between them. This isn't over, he barked, lunging for the library's side door. Lauren grabbed her designer clutch, which I now realized was bulging unnaturally, and followed him. They didn't go toward the guests. They scrambled through the servants' passage toward the private garage where his silver Mercedes was parked. Should we stop them? Mark asked, stepping toward the door. No, I said, calmly tucking the deed into my gown. Let them run, they won't get far. In the garage, my father tossed a heavy leather bag into the passenger seat. It was filled with the family, silver, and the jewelry he'd taken from my mother's safe years ago, pieces that legally belonged to the trust. He floored the engine, the tires screaming against the gravel as he sped down the long, winding driveway toward the massive iron gates of the Gables. He reached for the remote on his visor and jammed the button. Nothing happened. The gates remained shut, their heavy iron bars glowing like a cage in the sunset. He hit the button again, faster this time. Click, click, click. Open the damn gate, he screamed, leaning out the window. I walked down the driveway, Mark by my side, as the guests began to filter out of the garden to see what the commotion was. My father was trapped between the locked exit and the crowd of people he had tried so hard to impress. "The gates are on the same system as the safe, Dad," I called out, my voice carrying across the lawn. "When the buyer's representative logs in, the old codes are wiped. You're not a guest, and you're certainly not the owner. You're just a trespasser in a very expensive car." Lauren stepped out of the passenger side, her face flushed with shame as the guests, including the CEO he'd been sucking up to, whispered and pointed. "Sarah, let us out," Lauren cried. "This is kidnapping." "It's a private property lockdown," I corrected. "And since you have a bag full of trust assets in that car, we're just waiting for the authorities to perform a site exit audit." At that moment, the blue and red lights of a sheriff's cruiser appeared on the other side of the gate. "You called the police on your own father," Robert whispered, his bravado finally shattering as he looked at the officers stepping out of the car. "I called the police on a man who stole my college fund, forged my name on a permit, and tried to flee with my grandmother's silver," I said. "I'm just the landlord now, Robert, and your lease on my life just expired." Sheriff signaled for the gates to be opened manually. As the heavy iron bars creaked apart, the officers didn't let my father drive through. Instead, they signaled for him to step out of the car. The wedding guests, the high society my father worshipped, crowded around, their phones out, capturing the fall of the great Robert Vance. "Officer, this is a family dispute," Robert blustered, his voice cracking. "My daughter is being spiteful about her wedding arrangements. There's no need for." "Sir, we received a report of grand larceny regarding trust assets," the deputy said, his face like stone. "Please step away from the vehicle." The deputy reached into the passenger seat and pulled out the heavy leather bag. He unzipped it right there on the hood of the Mercedes. The guests gasped as my grandmother's heavy silver candelabras and velvet-lined jewelry boxes spilled out. But tucked at the very bottom, hidden inside a false lining, was a slim blue folder. "What's that?" I asked, stepping closer. My father lunged for it, but the deputy held him back. Mark picked up the folder and opened it. His eyes widened. "Sarah, this isn't jewelry. These are the life insurance policies for your mother." "So," I said, confused, "she passed away years ago." "Look at the date of the payout," Mark said, handing me the papers. "And look at the beneficiary." The policy had paid out $5,006,000 months after my mother's death. But the money hadn't gone into the medical research fund she had requested in her will. It had been diverted into a private account in the Cayman Islands, an account that was currently being used to pay the mortgage on Lauren's new, subsidized mansion. Lauren turned to our father, her face pale. "Dad, you told me that money was from your wise investments. You told me you were giving me my inheritance early." "I did it for us," Robert shouted. "To keep the lifestyle, to keep the name." "No," Lauren whispered, backing away from him as the deputy reached for his handcuffs. "You didn't do it for us. You used me to hide the money. If I'm living in a house bought with stolen insurance funds, I'm an accomplice." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a sudden, sharp terror. "Sarah, I didn't know, I swear. I thought he was just being the generous father he always pretended to be." "Then prove it, Lauren," I said, my voice cold. "Tell the officers where he keeps the rest of the records, or go down with him." Lauren stood frozen, her gaze darting between the handcuffs clicking onto our father's wrists and the crowd of elites who were currently deleting his contact info from their phones. She had built her entire identity on being the Vance Golden Girl, but the gold was flacking off to reveal lead. "Lauren, don't you dare," my father hissed, his face contorted. "Remember who paid for your life. Remember who bought that ring on your finger." Lauren looked at her 5-carat diamond, then at me. She saw the simple, stolen permit wedding I'd almost had and the quiet power I held now. She chose survival. "The study at the main house," Lauren said, her voice shaking but clear. "The bookshelf with the leather-bound set of Dickens. Behind A Tale of Two Cities, there's a second keypad. He calls it his insurance policy. He told me if anything ever happened to him, I was to take the contents and disappear. "You traitor," Robert screamed, struggling against the deputies. "I gave you everything." "You gave me a crime scene, Dad," Lauren yelled back, tears finally streaming down her face. "You turned my home into a laundering scheme." I looked at the deputy. "You heard her. Everything in that safe belongs to the Vance Trust. It contains the evidence of the diverted insurance payout and likely the rest of the missing medical research funds." As they loaded my father into the back of the cruiser, he looked out the window at me. For the first time in my life, there was no mockery in his eyes. There was only fear. He was realizing that the cheapy daughter was the only one who actually knew the value of anything. But the night wasn't over. Mark walked over to me and handed me a small, handwritten note he'd found tucked inside the blue folder. It was in my mother's handwriting, dated just weeks before she passed. "Sarah, if you are reading this, it means you found the courage I lacked. Don't just take back the money, take back the house. It was never meant to be a trophy. It was meant to be a home." I looked up at the stone walls of the gables. "Lauren," I said, turning to my sister. She flinched, expecting me to kick her while she was down. "What? Are you going to have me arrested too?" "No," I said, "but the mansion you're living in is being liquidated tomorrow to pay back the medical fund. You're homeless, Lauren, but there's a small apartment above the garage here. It's budget. It's cheap. And if you're willing to actually work for a living, I might need a new assistant to help run the community center." 1 month later, the dust had finally settled, literally. The construction signs at the gables were replaced with a simple, elegant plaque: the Sarah and Arthur Vance Community Foundation. The Grand Regency Ballroom, the place my father tried to force me into, went into bankruptcy. It turns out my father wasn't the only titan using it to launder money. Without his monthly infusions of stolen trust cash, the gilded doors stayed locked. I sat in my new office, the library where my father's world ended, and looked out at the garden. Lauren was out there, wearing a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, helping Elias plant the new rose bushes. She was exhausted, her manicure was ruined, and she was earning minimum wage. But for the first time in years, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. She was finally real. Mark walked in, dropping a legal envelope on my desk. "The forensic audit is complete. We recovered $12 million from the Cayman accounts. The medical research fund is fully restored, and the first grants have already been sent out." "And the man of the hour?" I asked. "He's waiting for you. Visiting hours started 10 minutes ago." The prison visiting room smelled of floor wax and regret. My father sat behind the glass, his $3,000 tuxedo replaced by a rough, orange jumpsuit. Without his stylists and his deal of the decade energy, he looked like a frail, hollow old man. "Come to gloat, Sarah," he rasped. "Come to tell me how much you love the house. I built that legacy. I made the Vance name mean something." "No, Dad," I said, sliding a single piece of paper into the transfer slot. "The name meant something when Grandpa had it. You just turned it into a brand. I'm here to give you the final tally." He looked at the paper. It wasn't a letter or a legal notice. It was a bill. Invoice, the cost of disdain. Canceled wedding permit, $500 paid in full. Stolen insurance funds, $5 million recovered. Stolen silver and assets, $150,000 returned. Daughter's dignity, priceless, not for sale. Total balance due, 10 years to life. "You're a monster," he whispered, his eyes filling with tears. "No, Dad," I said, standing up. "I'm just the budget version of a daughter. I'm efficient, I'm sustainable, and I don't cost more than I'm worth. You spent your whole life trying to buy the dream. I'm the one who woke up." I turned and walked out of the prison, the heavy steel doors clanging shut behind me. I didn't look back. I had a community center to open, a sister to teach, and a life to live that wasn't built on a lie. The wedding was over. But the marriage and the real legacy was just beginning. The end. Moral of the story: never mock someone for being cheap. They might just be saving up to buy your entire life.